Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Fiber Broadband Association's Fiber for Breakfast. We're now in our 22nd episode of 2023. But before we kick off, I'd like to thank Wesco, the platinum sponsor of Fiber for Breakfast, and our gold sponsor, Graybar. Yesterday, the FCC released the latest version of the national broadband maps. The biggest difference between, from the former FCC national broadband maps and the new maps are that the new ones are location-based, not census block-based. So previously, if one location in a census block was deemed served, then the entire census block was deemed served. With the location-based maps, the FCC is now able to greatly improve the accuracy in determining the number of unserved and underserved Americans. So the new FCC national broadband maps will show that more than 8.3 million U.S. homes and businesses lack access to high-speed broadband. 8.3 million, that means that they don't have 25.3. The new challenge process has greatly improved accuracy. So the FCC's mapping team has reviewed the challenges to the availability data to more than 4 million locations, and 75% of those have been resolved. The FCC has also improved collaboration by meeting with every state at least once, and the FCC maps are continuing to become more accurate and will continue to improve. By statute, the FCC will be releasing major updates twice a year. So this is great news that we're starting to get these maps all coming together, because these new FCC's national broadband maps will form the baseline for the NTI's allocation of the $42.45 billion BEAD funding to each state and territory by the end of June. So that's coming up pretty quickly. So I will be flying out Sunday to Santiago, Chile, for our first of our 2 Latin America Regional Fiber Connect events that kicks off next week. So the deployment of fiber in Latin America is going absolutely crazy, and I'm really excited to get down there. When I get back to the States, we'll be quickly coming up on our next Regional Fiber Connect workshop in Lake Tahoe, California on June 21st. So we hope to see you at beautiful Squaw Valley. It's going to be awesome, and we really hope that you guys can join us there. Also, registration is open and going crazy for Fiber Connect 23 in Orlando. So this is the quickest that we've started to see registration ramp up in the history of the Fiber Broadband Association. It'll be August 20 to 23rd. So this is going to be the biggest and best fiber broadband event in the world this year. We expect over 4,000 attendees and an amazing program. The event's sold out the past 2 years, and it's pretty clear it's going to do the same this year. So don't wait to register. Please book your room at the Gaylord in Orlando. That brings us to today's Fiber Breakfast session with Offir Schwartz, the founder and CEO of Capcon Networks, to discuss rural broadband operators, internet exchanges, peerings, and the user experience. But before I formally introduce today's guest, I'd like to introduce Trish Ehlers from our team, who's going to walk us through some housekeeping items.
Thanks, Gary. Good morning to everyone who's joined us today. Before I go over a few logistical items, we'd like to once again thank the platinum sponsor of Fiber for Breakfast, Wesco, and our gold sponsor, Graybar. Now, if everyone would keep in mind that you're in listen mode only, to ask a question, you can just type it into the question box in the control panel on the right side of your screen. We'll host a Q&A session with our panelists at the end of today's webinar. This presentation is being recorded and will be available on FBA's website within 24 to 48 hours. You can find the recording in the Events tab under the Fiber for Breakfast drop-down option. At the conclusion of the presentation, you'll be prompted to complete a very brief feedback survey. If you take a minute to do that, we really appreciate your input. I'll pass it back to Gary now to introduce our panelists and get us started. Gary?
Well, thanks, Trish, and good morning. I'm Gary Bolton, the president and CEO of the Fiber Broadband Association. Last week on Fiber for Breakfast, we heard from Mike O'Day, the Chief Technology Officer for Corning Optical Communications, who discussed planning the future of fiber networks, 4S design considerations. The key takeaway from Corning's Chief Technology Officer is that fiber that was deployed in the mid-1980s continues to work great, as fiber is a future-proof technology. That same fiber deployed nearly half a century ago will be delivering hundreds of terabits per second of data in the future. So what's in the ground is going to be lasting for decades to come. And today on Fiber for Breakfast, we have the pleasure of hearing from Offir Schwartz, the founder and CEO of Capcon Networks, discuss rural broadband operators, internet exchanges, peering, and user experience. Offir Schwartz is the founder and CEO of Capcon Networks and oversees the overall vision and strategy of the business. With over 20 years of experience in the industry, he's a seasoned network connectivity expert, and he's committed to improving the connectivity and bridging a digital divide, particularly in rural areas. Previously held positions at GigLinks Global and Velocity Networks, and he has a diverse background in telecommunications and has developed expertise in areas such as VoIP, SIP, call center solutions, wholesale, resale contracts with voice provider, and as a ASU, Arizona State guy, right, based in Austin, Texas. So Offir, welcome. Yeah. In our audience, please type in your questions to go, and we'll work them into the Q&A. With that, awesome. Let's get things rolling.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you for the intro. So yeah, so today, the discussion that we've got sort of queued up here is really centered around rural broadband operators. It's something that's near and dear to us, something that we've been working really hard on here at Capcon, and something that I like to talk about with rural broadband operators, just simply because rural broadband operators tend to be faced with challenges that other operators aren't really faced with. And so today I really want to talk about how rural broadband operators can help level the playing field against larger incumbent providers that they may be up against in their communities, and get an understanding of why larger providers have so many benefits over rural providers, and how to take steps and how to take actions to level that playing field. So Trish, if you want to skip to the next slide. Perfect. So like I mentioned earlier, you know, everybody knows what some of the benefits that larger operators have over smaller operators, specifically rural broadband operators. But today's discussion is really going to kind of dive into some of those details a little bit further, starting with the concept, or really more so a business arrangement known in our industry as settlement-free peering. And typically, settlement-free peering is something that you may have heard about or you may not have heard about, but it's typically reserved for only the largest providers. They're typically known as Tier 1 IP transit providers. And this is essentially a business arrangement where they're able to pass traffic to each other without having any money changed hands. So neither party pays either party in order to pass traffic, which really allows for the free flow of traffic between eyeball networks, which is the one side of the internet that is critical. That's all you guys out there, the rural broadband operators, and the content side of the internet. That's all of the CDNs, the video streaming platforms, online education platforms, IP telephony, online gaming, any destination for typical HTTP request. We consider that on the content side of the internet, and where users are sitting behind their TVs and their screens and their PCs at home or at the business, we consider those network operators eyeball operators. And in between the two, for the really large providers, is settlement-free peering, which is essentially the free flow of traffic between two providers or more providers, and without any exchange of money. We can go ahead and skip to the next slide. So as you can imagine, there are significant benefits to peering arrangements like this, but since they're only available for these large operators, the question becomes is how can we level the playing field for rural broadband operators? So some of the benefits that these larger operators are seeing are lower costs, better quality networks simply due to less hops in the networks, and virtually unlimited capacity. So how do we get to the point where a rural broadband operator can effectively create scenarios that look and feel a lot like what these large incumbent providers have today? And that's where internet exchanges come in. Next slide, please. So what's an internet exchange? If you're not familiar with internet exchanges, they're essentially very similar to what I had described prior to, as far as how large incumbent operators work, which is settlement-free peering. However, internet exchanges are actually a physical infrastructure that allow eyeball networks, ISPs, and content providers to physically interconnect with each other to exchange traffic. So internet exchanges have been around since the dawn of time, since the dawn of the internet, at least. In fact, a lot of the early generation of the internet was centered around internet exchanges, or at least the concept of internet exchanges being a central hub based in a specific regional location where everybody would bring their traffic to in order to connect to each other. That is the definition of the internet per se. And so today, what we've got is we have a middle ground solution for rural broadband operators to help you guys close the gap between becoming a huge tier 1 IP transit provider, but also realizing all the benefits that internet exchanges can offer. And so let's go ahead and skip to the next slide. So again, so why use an internet exchange? Internet exchanges give you the ability to bypass major IP transit providers and connect directly with the party that your traffic is destined for or to. IP transit, if you're familiar with the IP transit world, which if you're a rural broadband operator, you certainly are, you were talking about the big carrier names, the Lumens and Aurelions of the world, that you gotta pay to send your traffic out to the internet to connect to the content providers, the Netflix of the world, the Hulus, the Disney Plus. What Internet Exchange provides is a bypass so that you can hand your traffic off directly to those content providers without having to pay a middleman or a transit provider for that traffic. Next slide. Okay, so there's tons of benefits to internet exchanges. We can talk about that for a long time, but 5 key benefits that the internet exchange ecosystem provides are, the big one is obviously cost. The cost to transit traffic over a transit provider, a typical internet provider, relative to the cost of what it would cost you per meg to send your traffic through an internet exchange directly to a content provider is vastly different. We're talking about to the tune of anywhere between 15 to 35% per meg or greater. So that's the tangible quantitative benefit of internet exchanges. But from a more holistic look at it, improves latency by reducing the number of hops between the source, the request of the data, and its destination. When you are connected directly to Netflix, your traffic essentially traverses your network and connects directly into Netflix's local servers and returns that traffic back in a quicker, lower latency manner. And that obviously and ultimately leads to a better subscriber experience. So improved network quality, also enhanced capacity planning by adding internet exchange as a tertiary route for your network, allows network operators to better control the flow of the traffic on their network, and then also allows them to access cloud service providers to expand their service base, to expand access to some of the world's most powerful cloud service providers, such as the Amazons and Azures and AWSs of the world, and not to mention all the CDNs that are out there, the Cloudflares, all the hosting companies that are hosting all the gaming websites, the Riot Games of the world. They're all available via internet exchanges. So now that you know the benefits of internet exchanges, it's time to sort of pivot to, well, how do I get access to an internet exchange? What does that look like for me as a rural broadband operator? I want to take advantage of the cost savings. I want to take advantage of the better quality service that my subscribers will get. How do I get access to them? Next slide. So no internet exchange could really exist without the existence of what are known as carrier hotels. So what you see up here on the screen right now is actually a picture of 151 West Front Street in Toronto, Canada. It's my hometown. It's where I grew up. So I thought it'd be a good time to bring in some Canadian Canadian blood to the conversation. And so carrier hotels are essentially, if you were to picture a hotel, right, where everybody comes and they have their own suite or room in the building, that's exactly what a carrier hotel is, except each suite in that building is effectively a data center. And there's typically some common meet-me rooms in those buildings that everybody uses to run cross connects. These buildings are neutral data centers, so they'll typically allow any carrier or content provider to enter, and they act as a central hub for operators and content providers that serve specific regions to meet and interconnect. And this is where you'll typically find internet exchanges. So major cities are going to have carrier hotels. So we're talking about in North America, you're talking about Toronto, you're talking about Vancouver for Canada, in the US, Dallas, Los Angeles, Palo Alto, New York, Boston, Atlanta, and Chicago. All of them have internet exchanges, and all of them can easily be referenced and accessed through a tool called PeeringDB. If you're not familiar with PeeringDB, jot it down. It's peeringdb.com. Trish, if you want to go to the next slide, I've got a screenshot of it. But PeeringDB is a simple and easy way for you to discover network providers that are regional, internet exchanges that are regional to you. And the search tools is very straightforward. It's similar to Google in that you would just simply type the name of a company that you want to connect to. So we're just going to use the 100-pound gorilla in the room, we'll just use Netflix. So if you want to find out, as an example, where does Netflix offer direct peering? You can just simply type in a city name or simply type in the name Netflix, and it will show you all of the exchanges that Netflix currently offers peering out of. You can click into that exchange. You can see all of the other peers that are available in that exchange. And you can also drill down into Netflix's specific criteria for what they're looking for in a peer. Next slide, please. So going back to the example of the Toronto Internet Exchange, which is otherwise known as Torix, to give you an idea of what sort of types of content and providers you would typically find in an exchange, on the very, very right-hand side, they've got this really nice pie graph on their website that illustrates what type of providers you would typically find in exchanges. So obviously the largest portion are going to be ISPs because they're the ones that are driving all the traffic to the content providers, right? And then if you can just go down the list, but pretty much every single color or type of provider other than ISP and telecom provider that is in that list right there is effectively a content provider. And so this is a great illustration to show you how effective internet exchanges have become at bridging the two sides of the internet, the eyeball side and the content side of the internet. Let's see here. Trish, you can probably go to the next slide. So the more peers, the better. If you guys are taking note of PeeringDB, and some of you are probably looking at it right now and discovering the power of that tool, what you want to look for in there are the number of peers. The number of peers typically is the more the better. And you want to find an internet exchange that is regional to your area. So if you're, for example, in the Arkansas, Louisiana, New Mexico, Texas region, Dallas, Texas would be the most ideal internet exchange location for you, simply because that is the center of gravity for the internet for this entire region here in the South. Atlanta is another one. So Atlanta draws Florida, Tennessee, Alabama, and several other states around there, and then so on and so forth. You move across the country and looking for those regional centers of gravity for interconnecting with other network providers. So what we typically see with network providers that we work with is that when internet exchange is introduced into their network for the first time, up to about 65% of their total aggregate traffic can be peered off via an internet exchange versus being sent over a paid internet solution like a tier 1 IP transit provider. And so as you're trying to think about, well, how do I justify the cost of accessing the internet exchange? Really what it boils down to is cost per meg. What does it cost me to send my traffic out over these internet providers versus what would it cost me to send my traffic out via an internet exchange? And the variance, the difference between the two can be very, very large depending on how much traffic you have. Every meg that is sent out via an internet exchange at a lower cost per meg is one less meg of traffic that needs to be paid for to an upstream internet provider. So if you think about it in those terms, every meg I send out via an internet exchange is not only a cost savings to me, but is one more user that I'm serving better, that is having a better user experience, that I as an operator am effectively distributing my network over multiple routes to ensure uptime, security, so on and so forth. All those fringe benefits of internet exchanges. Next slide, please. So as a consultant for rural broadband operators, we don't want to always just look at things in a vacuum. As a broadband operator, it's very, very important that the strategy for your forecasted growth includes multiple avenues to improve the subscriber experience. Internet exchange is one of them, but there are many, many other avenues that are alternatives to internet exchange that can really, really help improve the subscriber experience and also lower costs and reduce the dependency on paid upstream internet traffic. Some of them are edge caching solutions. So if you're familiar with them, most of them are at no cost or little cost to you as the broadband operator. All you have to do is offer some co-location space for servers for providers like Apple, providers like Google, Akamai, and several other ones to deposit caching servers into your network, which cache content that is traditionally high frequency content that your users are looking for. And those are very, very low cost solutions or no cost solutions that help reduce the dependency on upstream transit providers. If you're a rural broadband operator and you've reached a level that you have enough traffic to qualify for certain types of solutions, providers like Netflix, Open Connect, they offer their version of a content caching solution. Many of you probably already have this in place. And again, there's varying levels of this solution, but in some cases, Netflix will even bring their own dedicated transport so that they can backhaul traffic off your network into their network. If you're not familiar with some of the third-party caching solutions that are out there, Quilt is a very, very, very effective content caching solution if you're not ready to move into a full-blown internet exchange type model. But Quilt is a great service. It effectively aggregates a lot of the content providers that are out there on the world and deposits their content into your network so that when subscribers call for that content, it's being delivered to them locally over your network, not transiting out to the internet to retrieve that traffic. So that pretty much sort of sums up my discussion or presentation for today. I do want to just kind of sum this up. Trish, if you want to go to the next slide, internet exchange, while it is a great solution for rural broadband operators, it is only one solution, and it needs to be thought of as part of the total overall network strategy for broadband operators, especially rural broadband operators that are growing. There's obviously we're headed towards the BEAD funding season here, and that's going to drive subscriber growth. We'd like to see that all rural broadband operators are thinking well in advance on how to forecast capacity needs early and explore the impacts of adding these types of solutions into their networks to better serve their communities and better serve their subscribers, enable smart city applications, telehealth applications, and overall increase the level of service that their subscribers are experiencing and the quality of life in their community. that's the nuts and bolts of the presentation, Gary. I think I'll turn it back over to you I think we're pretty much right at time.
Yeah, so Offir, this is really great information. So I got a lot of questions here.
Okay.
One of them comes in and says, hey, is it worth all the work to get into an exchange? Is it worth it if you have less than 30,000 customer and no real issues? I mean, what's the tipping point where this is worth a rural operator getting involved?
You got to look at these things on a case-by-case basis. There is no one-size-fits-all sort of solution or answer for this. In some cases, internet exchange may not be the right fit for a provider, right? But in other solutions or in other cases, it may be a necessity. So it really just depends on that particular operator's service footprint, where they are geographically, regionally and throughout the country, and whether or not it's worth it. Because again, there are lots of alternatives to IX. The IX isn't the only solution out there, right? So it really is a case-by-cases type of engagement. It's high touch and requires a conversation, but I would say generally speaking, yes. But again, it's really a discussion topic more than anything.
Yeah. So one of the questions is I wanted you to address the difference between a cooperative versus a for-profit IX, and in your opinion, whether the distinction matters in the current market environment.
I mean, the spirit of an IX is interconnection, right? So it costs money. I mean, they have to, they got to pay for power, right? And they got to pay for rent. So I've seen both models. Both models are successful. Typically what I see when a cooperative IX model is that it's typically ISPs trying to connect with other ISPs, and they typically don't attract a lot of the large fish, right? The big fish, the big content providers. Whereas the paid IXPs, they're typically located in the major carrier hotels in major cities. So I think they both serve purposes that are useful,
yeah.
And have use cases that are very relevant to broadband operators. And so they both should be looked at. But as far as the model itself, the business model, I think they're both valid, and they should be considered as needed.
That makes sense. What about, one of the questions is, what's the financial impact of transport to the IX in your model?
I mean, we can boil that down very, very easily. The only factor that matters when it comes to transport and transit is, what does it boil down to cost per meg? Let's compare transport. If you're a rural broadband operator, transport is a necessity no matter what. So there is no solution where a rural broadband operator connects to the internet without transport, unless you're already taking down co-location and all those other very expensive CapEx and OpEx heavy expenses. But most rural broadband operators are not. So transport is a necessity. So what is my cost per meg total, all in, to send traffic out over my transport and upstream internet connection providers, versus what is my cost per meg to send it out over transport via an IX? And that difference right there is typically in the 15 to 35% difference range.
And then similar question is, if you're a rural provider that's a long way from a city with an IX, how do you trade off the price of transport against the price of transit? Is that really come down to more of the latency and the quality benefits?
Well, so again, whether you buy internet, if you're a rural broadband provider and you go to an AT&T and say, I want 100 gig of AT&T internet, right? They're bringing you the transport and they're bundling it into the cost. So whether you parse it out and purchase your own transport and your own upstream provider, or you buy it as a total solution from somebody else, it all boils down to cost per meg. And that's really where the side-by-side comparison has to happen to determine whether or not it's feasible from a cost perspective, and whether or not the more ancillary benefits, such as lower latency, less hops, tertiary routes, all of the other benefits are worthwhile for you. And those are business decisions that each broadband operator has to make on their own.
Well, Offir, this is a super interesting topic, and really appreciate what you and your team are doing to advance rural broadband. So thanks everybody for joining us today, and we look forward to getting back together next Wednesday for Fiber Breakfast. So you're not going to want to miss that. We'll see you guys next Wednesday.
Thank you so much.